Good evening, guten Abend. Feedback. Guten Abend, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Studentinnen und Studenten und vor allem natürlich Susanne Kriemann, unsere neue Kollegin. Es ist mir wirklich ein ganz besonderes Vergnügen, Sie heute ganz kurz nicht nur zu begrüßen, sondern einzuleiten. Ich glaube, ich darf das sagen, allzu häufig hatte Ihre Fachgruppe keine Frauen gehabt in den letzten 25 Jahren und ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie die Gruppe der Medienkünstler als Medienkünstlerin erweitern und bereichern, aber auch, weil Sie tatsächlich aus meiner Wahrnehmung eine ganz besondere Künstlerin sind und über diese Wahrnehmung möchte ich ein paar Worte verlieren. Ihre Professur ist eine für künstlerische Fotografie oder Fotokunst, dafür gibt es ganz viele unterschiedliche Begriffe. Wir haben uns erlaubt, diese Begrifflichkeit ein bisschen zu expandieren in den letzten Monaten und haben sie in einem Untertitel Professur für das technische Bild in der Kunst genannt. Es ist unglaublich schwer, heute Fotografie und ihre mediale, präzise Definition noch zu greifen. Sie ist selber unglaublich fluide, flüchtig geworden in vielerlei Hinsicht, lässt sich Gott sei Dank nicht mehr vielleicht so festlegen, wie das über einige Jahrzehnte in ihrer frühen Geschichte der Fall war, aber es klappte eigentlich schon kurze Zeit nach der Erfindung nicht mal so richtig. Und es ist sehr wichtig, dass wir zusammen eben mit den Studierenden hier an der HfG darüber nachdenken, forschend nachdenken, ästhetisch nachdenken, wie man dieses wunderbare Medium auch weiterentwickeln kann und wie man es weiter denken kann. Was ich an Ihrer Arbeit in diesem Zusammenhang besonders spannend finde, ist Ihre sehr intensive Auseinandersetzung mit etwas, was zunächst mal selbstverständlich und trivial zu sein scheint, nämlich, dass die Fotografie sowas ist wie aufgehobene Zeit. Das haben ja ganz viele auch schon geschrieben, eingefrorene Zeit. Je nachdem, wer schreibt, Kulturpessimisten oder Kulturoptimisten, sind diese Begriffe dann etwas mehr negativ oder mehr positiv besetzt, aber unbestritten ist selbstverständlich dieses wunderbare Spannungsverhältnis zwischen Zeit und Fotografie. Das ist der Kern sicher dieses Mediums und seiner ästhetischen, auch seiner philosophischen, reflexiven Arbeit. Die Zeit, die wir nicht besitzen, wir wissen, es ist das Dümmste, was wir sagen können, dass wir Zeit haben. Genau das Gleiche gilt natürlich für das Gegenteil, dass wir keine Zeit haben. Das ist das Blödeste, was man sagen kann, weil die Zeit hat uns, und zwar unwiederbringlich, sie hat uns hartnäckig, sie benutzt uns als Material, um anzuzeigen, dass wir lebendig sind, dass wir leben, dass wir vergehen, dass wir nicht ewig sind. Die Zeit hat uns, und das macht gleichzeitig den Hintergrund für die enorme Karriere technischer Bilder wie der Fotografie aus, natürlich eben auch dann etwas später im 19. Jahrhundert des Films. Denn es sieht so aus, als könne man mit Hilfe der Fotografie die Zeit überlisten und genau das tun, was wir im Leben, im wirklichen Leben eben nicht tun können, Zeit festzuhalten, zu konservieren und sie dann zum Objekt zu machen, mit dem wir dann arbeiten können. Wir können diese eingefrorene, diese aufgehobene Zeit verändern. Wir können mit den heutigen Mitteln selber auch das Statische zum Beispiel in einem Bild wieder prozessieren und können ihm Leben einhauchen, können es generieren, können es lebendig machen. Das sind Dinge, die ich hochspannend finde. Ich gebe zu, auch gerne für meine eigene Arbeit und für meine eigenen Überlegungen und die ich in Ihrer künstlerischen Arbeit sehr, sehr stark schwingen sehe. Ihre Arbeit, die zwischen Vergangenheit und Gegenwart, aber ganz besonders stark eben auch zwischen Archiv und künftigen Handlungsmöglichkeiten hin und her schwingt, changiert. Und das kann nur für uns spannend sein und spannend werden. Wir freuen uns sehr auf die Zusammenarbeit. Susanne Kriemann, auch das, denke ich, ist wichtig und war natürlich eben auch ein sehr wichtiger Grund dafür, dass wir uns für sie massiv interessiert haben, ist jemand, die auch in vielerlei Hinsicht zu uns, zu dieser Hochschule für Gestaltung, nicht nur passt, sondern eigentlich ihren Geist verkörpert, bevor sie überhaupt hierher gekommen ist. Sie arbeitet sehr stark interdisziplinär, transdisziplinär. Das waren immer Dinge, die Susanne Kriemann und sind Dinge, die ihr am Herzen liegen oder sind Haltungen, die ihr wichtig sind. Sie hat auch immer wieder sehr stark zwischen, sagen wir, ihrer künstlerisch-praktischen Arbeit und philosophischen Überlegungen, theoretischen Überlegungen, historischen Überlegungen, inklusive medienarchäologischer Überlegungen gearbeitet. Auch das ist für uns hochinteressant und ich denke und hoffe natürlich auch, dass das für Fachgruppen wie zum Beispiel unsere Designer hochspannend werden kann. Susanne Kriemann hat sich, was die Veröffentlichung ihrer Arbeiten anbelangt, immer auch sehr stark mit Büchern beschäftigt, insbesondere mit Künstlerbüchern. Und das ist eine ganz besondere Dimension auch ihrer Arbeit. Die Künstlerbücher, die natürlich auch für uns hier in vielerlei Hinsicht eine Rolle spielen sollen und hoffentlich spielen werden. Sie biografisch vorzustellen, das gilt auch für die folgenden Antrittsvorlesungen mit Daten, die man dann ganz schnell auch wieder vergisst und die jeder auf Wikipedia nachlesen kann, wenn man auf ihre Website geht oder eben tatsächlich in Wiki Reality einsteigt. Das halte ich für nicht so toll, dafür ist die Zeit viel zu wertvoll heute Abend. Wir wollen ihr vor allem zuhören, aber ich möchte doch ganz kurz erwähnen, weil ich das für wichtig halte, dass sie hier unweit von Karlsurhe in Stuttgart an der Akademie der Bildenden Künste studiert hat. Ich möchte es deshalb erwähnen, weil auch mir persönlich ihre Lehrer sehr nahestehen in ihrer künstlerischen Arbeit, beziehungsweise ihre Hauptlehrerin und ein Lehrer, es war ein Mann und eine Frau, Josef Kossut und Joan Jonas, die ich mehrfach treffen durfte und deren Arbeit ich sehr bewundere, auch Kossut. An das Studium in Stuttgart hat sich dann ein weiteres kürzeres Studium an der École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris angeschlossen. Und unter anderem hat sie auch mit Franz West studiert, der oder gelernt, sich entwickelt, wie auch immer man das bezeichnen möchte, der uns als Künstler für uns eine ganz besondere Bedeutung hat, aber auch bei Bustamante. Ich will das jetzt nicht weiter ausführen. Etwas, was mir noch sehr wichtig auch zu erwähnen scheint, ist, sie wird auch, glaube ich, gleich auf Englisch sprechen. Sie kann das viel besser als ich. She will switch to English within a few seconds because we have some colleagues who don't understand me. At the moment, she's a wonderful cosmopolitan artist, also as a teacher. She was traveling a lot all over the world. She I made some notes. She still is advising researcher at the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht. She was teaching, giving seminars, lecturing in Canada, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Sweden, in Denmark, in many places of the world. It's great that she brings in these experiences with all these different people, cultures, and aesthetical tactics, strategies here to Karlsruhe to work with us. I was very surprised. I think when I read your curriculum vitae the first time, I really missed this, that you also worked with James Langdon. Is this our James Langdon? This is really a wonderful coincidence. You made projects with audio, sound with him. Perhaps you want to talk about that later, otherwise we do that individually. This was a complete surprise for me. So there were already, or there had been already cooperations which you might be able perhaps to bring forward here at the school. Susanne Kriemann, we welcome you warm-heartedly. Your theme for tonight is Through an Evening. Dark in a monochrome, near perfect way. Welcome, Susanne Kriemann.
So, good evening and thank you very much. I can hardly breathe from all these amazing words. I want to first thank very much Herr Zielinski, but also the team of HfG and the professors, my fellow professors, and the people that work in the administration, and the students that have welcomed me in an amazing way. I'm here since 1.5 months and I feel almost as not a stranger anymore, so I'm very happy about this. Thank you so much. And I want to ask you all to please see this more as a conversation rather than a lecture tonight. I think that it's important for me to get your feedback, and I will switch between two positions. I will have a slide projection and I will also live show you my books. And I think this is maybe a nice way how to start a dialogue tonight. And if you have any questions, or if you feel that there is a good comment to make philosophically, for example, then I'm very happy to hear that. So I'm projecting a poem by Maria Barnes. From this poem I took the title of tonight's lecture. It was actually why I chose a poem was more to have a kind of, I knew already we're going to be in the darkness for quite some time, and perhaps to extend the feeling of this evening in a monochrome near perfect way was a kind of projection to what could happen in a way in this room tonight. The story how the poem was written is quite interesting. It's 2013 I got invited to the site residency, which asked me to come for 14 days into a retreat on the island of Gotland and to completely refrain from communication and work. So to be in the middle of the woods in a small cabin, think, not do anything, don't please take any picture, and please just don't try to communicate with anyone. So I accepted the invite, and I thought it was a really amazing thing, because site residency also in its name already was very much based on the site and the non-site concept of Robert Smithson, and it's something that interests me in my work for quite some time. So the project was, I went there and I was indeed sitting around in this wooden cabin, but also driving along the island. Gotland is an island that is primarily based on limestone. It has a huge concrete factory, it has a huge fossil history. It's some island that is quite an amazing place to be alone in the middle of the woods. But on the second day of this kind of undertaking in the winter, I went around and I discovered an industrial site which seemed to be left over, and I thought, wow, this is the site, this is so amazing. A leftover industry with its concrete buildings and its amazing tunnel and the mountain, the tailings, and I'm sure this is going to be the site for maybe after 14 days kind of work. but the next day I found out that this is a hotel which is like high standard luxury, and the royals of Swedish family are hosting there sometimes. So I had this interesting shock, and also it was of course a very productive shock, because I realized that the moment of the discovery, which is kind of part of my profession as someone that likes to discover and then document the discoveries through cameras, also was like at the same time how the commercial made the spaces of former abundantness a kind of super important side. So I'm going to switch to the book now. I think it's a little bit too much light. Okay. So on the side, quite a lot of light. Can you kind of darken a little bit? Könnt ihr das Licht ein bisschen? Okay. After that 14 days, I had great ideas to make new works, because this never works. Artist to not work is always the kind of ticket to start working immediately. So on that industrial site, I discovered this mountain, which was in an amazing location. The mountain was directly on the shore to the sea, and at night the sun would disappear behind the mountain, and in the morning the mountain would get into the full lightning. So the cover of the book is kind of, in a way, that moment of the mountain as a maybe interface, or perhaps as a kind of registration field, a recording system of limestone. But at the same time, what interested me in the mountain in a sculptural way was that it's not a mountain, it's a tailing from the 70s that was left over after industry, but it's also not anymore concrete. It will never become a building. So it's this moment of total in-betweenness, which is also emphasized by the lightning situation of this mountain. So I want to show you a little bit how my work kind of started to develop. It's that photo that I took quite quickly with a very high definition camera, but it's maybe difficult to see in a beamer. But what was interesting for me is that this high definition camera had a real problem with the rendering of the rubble, of the concrete. And so here in the middle we have this kind of complete digital noise, which is, in a funny way, for me was very productive. All of a sudden I thought about the moment of the resolution, but also the moment of looking at something which is neither nor, but all of a sudden the mountain also became a screen somehow in a kind of transformed way. So I'm going to go through the beginning of the book, where I'm kind of starting with the mountain as a kind of research on how this mountain could perhaps become a screen, or at least a kind of threshold between the one and the other source of lightning. And the design of the book is made by Yoo-Yoon Cho. She's a Korean designer based in New York. And our collaboration existed on the mode of she would like to develop some kind of strange thing, and I give her the pictures for it, and then later we kind of start to shift the pictures. But maybe you can see already that how the book is working is without text. It's telling the story of this fragmentation of the image, but also of this constant moment of what you look at is maybe not what you're seeing, or the question of what you exactly see when you're looking into this kind of landscape documentation. I spent an entire day and night and morning, so it was like a kind of the moment of dusk and the moment of dawn. And so somehow it's a kind of big shift, but to burn concrete you need to fuel an oven, and you heat up the stones until they crash, and then they become dust. So And there is this work desk, the people that work 24 hours 7, they are looking into the fire of the oven, and I thought it was an interesting way how that digital sun was all of a sudden appearing again in my work. So yeah, this half of the book is a kind of image thing, and then the other part of the book is text. I think it's quite interesting how the layout of the text is made in a kind of... we use two typefaces, maybe that's interesting for the designers. The typeface is made by Radim Pesco, it's Larish, and it's a new and an old one. The old one is more romantic and the new one is much more pragmatic, but we changed the two typefaces in a very interesting, random way, which made the copy editors of the book kind of totally crazy, because they always saw the wrong dot on an I or an E. So that was something that, just to talk. And so here the poem appears by Maria Bana. So the poem is kind of inherited inside of the book. How the poem was written, that is like maybe an interesting story for you, because after this 14 days of being in this solitude and not being able to work, the first person I needed to talk to was Maria Bana. That was like kind of also part of the contract. So I came back from this amazing experience and I started to tell her about that tunnel that was underneath the mountain, which was like a kind of 6 by 6, almost like a perfect telescopic lens kind of way, where, which was now used, of course, as a dinner location for weddings and stuff, but before it was the tunnel that transported the rubble of cement to become, like the rubble of the mountain to become cement. And I was sitting in this tunnel for quite some time. So I got the key and I wanted to be in this darkness to understand that the mountain on top of me is a kind of, like, what is this, like somehow. So that is why in the poem she's talking about this walking and this moment of the darkness and the moment of lightning and so on. And at the very end of the book there is an archive that I found. It's just a few images actually of the making of that mountain, which was not so easy to find, but here you can see, like at the very end of the book, maybe as a kind of epilogue, that there was once an activity to this space, which has now become a kind of luxury hotel site. At the very end of the book, I make some kind of photo of garbage, which is used to fuel those ovens. And in an interesting way for me, it kind of linked to the kind of resolution or the kind of rubble, the digital rubble, to that mountain somehow. So there was a lot of visual things that were quite accidentally happening, really. It's quite often in my work that things come not so well planned, let's say, but sometimes these things are quite interesting after all. But later I thought, so somehow the work has the form of the book, of course, but which kind of form would the work take when it's in an exhibition? And because I was interested about this image and also about the process of how this image itself, the mountain itself, could actually become part of the image. So part of the book production was a text by Kirsty Bell, and I asked Kirsty to do what I have experienced in 14 days within a trip of 3 days, and at the end of this trip to please go to this mountain and take the stones and bring them to me. And we grained the stones, we made pigment from those stones, and in the end we printed the work with the pigment of the stone, which was a very interesting process to me. So you also perhaps are familiar with rock paper. Rock paper is made out of the rubble of the leftover of cement mining factories. So it consists of cement dust and glue. And so we printed these on rock paper also. So why I'm starting with this work is somehow that it's the beginning of a new process for me, how to understand how I can work with the medium of photography without always having this kind of interesting or research-oriented or also long-term conceptualizing work process. And in the end, the solution would be to press an inkjet printer's button and have a kind of result where I don't have any real relation to the process. So in Dust, I started for the first time to understand that also an image is like a sculptural process, and it is really important to have the materiality within the work as much as in the research and in the book. So I show you like 3, but it's a very interesting process because we kind of printed with the rubble of the cement. And to make it appear, because it's 80% transparent, we needed to have a background that was kind of giving a substance to the then appearing white of the rubble of the mountain. Yeah. So I want to continue with another work of mine which started out in 2013. Somehow my presentation is not chronological at all, so I'm kind of going back and forth, and I hope that's in an interesting way contributing to the story that I'm telling you tonight. That quote is by Jean-Paul Sartre, and it was quoted in a text that was written for another book of mine by Eva Schmidt. She's the curator of museum in Singen, and we were discussing how we could talk about the relation between a threshold of the one image that is like a clear landscape picture to the moment of that this landscape becomes a materiality and a kind of real project of being excavated, being mined, and being like what is like behind that image and what is in front of the image, and how can these processes interfere in an interesting way. So I hope you can read the quote. I think it's in an interesting way setting the tone to the work Pechblende that I want to talk to you about it. Pechblende is in English pitchblende. It's uraninite. It's rock that is actually quite radioactive. It's more radioactive than uranium. And I'm showing you one of those rocks that I found in the Museum of Natural History in New York. The story why I was looking for that rock was a research that I was undertaking in the territory of Eastern Germany in Thuringia and Saxony, where in the time between 1946 and 1990s, a lot of uranium was mined for the nuclear armament of the Soviet Union. It's the part where it's near Jena, maybe you know it in Germany. It's quite a place which is very close to actually where I'm born, only there was that wall, and therefore was the longest way to come there was through Berlin and then go all the way down again. So it was kind of the Ore Mountains. It's an area where fairy tales are quite often told. It's an area which is kind of very rich, and that it was also an area where uranium was mined for the nuclear armament of the Soviet Union was somehow new to me, and I thought it was very interesting to know about those rocks that were mined there. And I found quite a bit of those rocks in different museum collections. Quite some, of course, in the Museum of Natural History in Berlin, but also that one that comes from Saxony in the 1970s into the collection of the museum, and that comes from Johannes Georgenstadt, which is one of those mining areas. To talk further about the relation between how images can be made and what is somehow my relation towards creation of images, I placed that rock on a sheet film of 8 by 10 inch, and I waited 8 days, and this photograph was kind of appearing. What's interesting to me about this photograph, because it's an autoradiograph, and you know Henry Becquerel made autoradiographs. It's a practice to discover how radioactive some things are. that is like since the 1920s. It's something that scientists use, but what was interesting for me is first of all to be myself in this photo lab of the American Museum of Natural History and actually test the stone and wait those days, and in these 8 days of time of waiting, something was visible that I haven't seen when I was looking at the stone, and somehow I was interested more and more about the possibility of autoradiography in relation to the time. So I wanted to show timelines, different timelines of that stone emitting radioactive rays, for example, 3 days, 6 days, 8 days, and 12 days, and the total decay time of that stone is 4.5 billion years. So I was starting to think about 8 days within 4.5 billion years, and what does this time frames kind of talk to me about things that are invisible and appear all of a sudden, but also about the moment of time itself when I'm looking at radioactive things. Then I was quite interested in other things that were doing autoradiographs. So this is an archival image from Operation Crossroads. The fish has eaten a radioactive algae, and it's 48 hours exposure to this fish, but I can show you some more crazy autoradiographs that were made in Fukushima and also in different other places, but it's not about the spectacularity of the image for me. It's more about the moment when there is zero distance between that the fish can become some kind of camera and the paper that receives the rays. There is zero distance, but also, as you see in this photographs, the radioactive rays do not recognize the threshold of the film. So that's why the Sartre quote was kind of interesting for me, because when is the moment of the threshold recognized by something that is used quite a lot in our time, and how could I, as an artist, talk about these things in terms of time, but also in terms of distances. Here is an aerial photograph of the Bundesarchiv. It shows a radioactive tailing from the 1970s in Schlema. It's quite close to Jena. And I'm showing you 4 different aerial views of that area, where the process of the cleaning of this radioactive tailing is kind of documented by aerial photography. So the area has been mined extensively until the 19th, and then the federal government decided that there will be never ever mining of uranium on German territory. And the project of the rehabilitation of the landscape is scheduled until 2045 and will be probably extended to 100,000 years. So I'm quite interested in this, how that kind of cleaning process is kind of in an interesting way reflecting on timelines. So this is 1970s, this is 1980s, the same tailing. This is then in the 2001 kind of, where you see already it's kind of getting a little bit less. And this is 2013, where they kind of cleaned or dried some of this tailing. The process of the cleaning of the tailing is another thing that interests me in terms of the materiality that has this kind of long possibilities of exposure, but also that the landscape itself becomes like a recording system. So, of course, the recording system is made by the airplanes and the vessels that are containing the human and the camera. So there's this extended camera distance and the landscape, and this is an undertaking of like about 50, 60 years. But now that kind of tailing is almost disappeared. I have a photo of the tailing now. But the dust that is created by the process of drying is dried on textile, and those textiles are wrapped and become nuclear waste. So there's a whole interesting way of undertaking how to say a landscape that has been undergone huge transformations, and entire villages disappeared overnight because there was a lot of uranium underneath this village, and there's an amazing process of changing landscapes, changing material from outside, inside of the mountain, coming outside, and outside of the mountain now being put back into the mines because of the cleaning process of this landscape. So I want to show you the book quickly, and then this is the book I made. It's called Library for Radioactive Afterlife. It's some kind of first book, I think, because 2045 is a long time ago, And also I think that there are so many different processes to think about how a library for radioactive afterlife could look like. That's why we decided to have an open spine, for example. And at the very beginning, as a kind of prologue, there are these different light exposures of the rocks, different rocks that I found in different museum collections, just to give this kind of index of stones that are constantly emitting rays in collections. So it's not something that you can locate somehow to this place in Thuringia, but it's also, in a way, part of collections that have special properties. And then we start the book with a very pragmatic text that is the Stuhl, chair, Lampe, and shelf life. So something that is like maybe scheduling a kind of architecture of a library. And then there are different texts. One is by Lutz Seiler. Lutz Seiler is a poet and writer who comes actually from near Schlema, and he also wrote a text for the book. And I want to really go quite fast through it because some more work to discuss. But I think, for example, here this is an interesting picture of the pyramids of Ronneburg, as they were called. These are two radioactive tailings that were very, very high. And now they disappeared. They have been reinserted into the former mines. That place underneath those tailings becomes now a location where I'm doing additional research, which I will show you just afterwards. So since the 50s, these tailings are existing, and rain and so stuff is kind of constantly transmitting through those mountains into the ground. So the area is declared one of many lost areas where 3 of 4 life necessary elements like water, air, ground, and groundwater, air, soil, fire. And fire, no? Yeah. Food, perhaps, is polluted for over 100,000 years. So, yeah, here you see how close it is to the neighborhoods of people. Here we have those aerial photographs, but I think I want to show you some of those autoradiographs, which were really like an interesting way how to understand a camera in a different way, but also violence. So here, for example, you have a 48 hours exposure of a snake that is found in Fukushima. And there are autoradiographs from 1946, which shows a kidney of a pig and a part of a muscle of a pig as an autoradiograph. So I think this is the radioactive algae that was eaten by that fish. So it's from books and research, but also from photographers that were kind to borrow this image to have. In my publication, this is a radioactive frog autoradiograph that I found in the National Archives in Washington, and some rats that are exposing, and a piece of a tree. So I think for this, I'm going to switch a little bit to my next work, because what I found always very important when I'm showing you these images is that the research of the work is quite complex, and also very often it's a lot of material that is to work with. It's a lot of archival material, it's a lot of photographs that I'm taking, but how am they going to be placed in an exhibition space without the book? The book is already its own piece somehow, you can take it home. It's a very interesting way of distributing the work. It's quite inexpensive, I think a copy is like 20 euros or something. But how would that work appear in the space? So, yeah, I developed a kind of inverted camera obscura. This is an exhibition view from Witte de Witt in Rotterdam, which was kind of architecturally based on a kind of library of radioactive afterlife. These boxes are constructed by the architect Oksana Gorinovic in collaboration with me. And inside of the box we installed new LED matrix systems, which are actually quite transmitting a lot of light, so it's almost near the lumen of a daylight, and this is projected through a camera lens onto the wall in real time. So maybe I can show you this image, which kind of maybe makes it a bit clearer. So there, inside is the light, it's an inverted camera obscura, and in real time these objects are projected onto the wall. What was important for me about this process, and which made me really kind of yeah, in a way excited about it, is that there was no image left, there was no trace of an image left when we switched off the electricity. There's also no way how to depict it somehow, because yeah, I wanted it to be a live thing, as something that is constantly transmitting rays, somehow similar to those stones that are transmitting rays in a constant way. And by the speed of light, the object is kind of turned around and projected onto the wall. So it is a bit didactic, but that's the projection, and this is what is inside of the lens. So you can look through the lens into the box and you see the real object, and it's quite a strong experience, because you are almost with your own eyes the photographer or the camera, or perhaps also the one that sees things in that way and the other. So there is this kind of, I don't know, what I'm quite interested in, how some kind of light comes through this very thin hole of a lens or a diaphragma and becoming something else but pure light. And I chose those tools. These are the tools that is the minimum gear of a miner to go into uranium mining. It's the helmet, the water bottle, the pitch lamp, the lifesaver, and the drills. So you can see it: drills, lifesaver, pitch lamp, water bottle, and helmet. Inside of the mines it was sometimes 60 degrees, so absolutely no other things to wear than that. And I also was interested in it because I was making quite some interviews with those miners, and it's a very recent history. It's a history that is kind of not really welcome in a kind of, it's not spectacular in the way that, wow, we love nuclear power right now. And it's also not cool because those guys were earning a lot of money but ruining really their health. So there is like a lot of feedback by the public, like, oh, poor you, but why did you do it? But at the same time, of course, these people are still alive and they're having a lot to tell about different stories, and also about, for example, the very interesting thing about that a Geiger counter is used as a passport control between the mine that is owned by the Soviet government and the exterior of the mine that is GDR territory. And when the miners went out of the mine, they were looked through by Geiger counter to not actually take any little dust under the nails of the very precious uraninite. And I thought it was an interesting way how to give them a kind of, I know, it's how to give an image for these workers without showing them, because there's loads of photos in the archives of showing them in a kind of victimizing way, of like them being like full of black dust, or like heroic workers' portraits of the GDR photography time, but somehow that they were the silent, the tools were somehow silently coordinating those bodies that were wearing them. And these tools are coming from from uranium mines, and they are borrowed by the Museum of Uranium Mining in Schliemann. I have 2 sets of tools, and I can borrow them until I don't want them anymore, so that they're not radioactive. There's a lot of curators asking if they have some radioactive stuff in their museums right now, but maybe that's a good way how to go to the next work that I'm doing right now. So that is kind of a work in process. And it's a quote by Victor Hugo that I'm projecting right now, which actually dates back from the time when I studied, which already back then in time was making me really happy when I was reading it, about the kind of different volumes and how like very tiny little volumes can become part of your not only physical but psychological and also kind of activating lifestyle. I revisited this quote because somehow I thought it was the best thing I did during my studies, but just to find that one quote. But I'm also interested in the process of what the radioactive dust can do with when you inhale it. So I started to, this is a ground photo of that tailing that we've seen from aerial perspective. In 2016, I visited this area with geologists of the University of Jena, which are doing applied geology, and they are researching how to rehabilitate a landscape that is polluted for 100,000 years. That means, in very, very clear terms, the groundwater is underneath the groundwater are the former uranium mines filled with the former tailings which were re-entering the ground, and if it rains, the soil is polluted with a lot of pitch blende rubble. If it rains, somehow the groundwater is in danger by 2 ways, either if the level of groundwater rises up or if the rain goes into the groundwater. So there are pump systems that have to run for 100,000 years, which is same thing in Cologne, I believe, in the former salt mines. It's just an interesting time scale. And this is the space called Gessenwiese. It's exactly that location underneath this huge tailing that I've shown you before in my book. And it's one of the most polluted areas, but it's now the property for 4 years of the researchers of the geology department of the University of Jena. So they're doing these kind of squares where the water from the ground can't enter because this kind of soil is kept in buckets, and next to it, like some other testing. The area is constantly monitored by scanners here. I thought it was also very interesting for what means scanning, when the scanner is hanging a little bit down that little helicopter and produces this kind of amazing image, which is a kind of echo of the landscape. And here we see a point which is not normally behaving. That means that there is some radioactive stuff to be found. And here is another point. And so we were checking different things. We were digging out some stuff. That's the result of our little archaeological dig. And there is some zinc and aluminium and some pitch blende samples and also some asphalt. So these kind of pollution elements are somehow like the scanner reacts somehow on their kind of emitting possibilities, which I found quite an interesting thing. So this is a piece of the ground, and go in front one more time, because we were kind of harvesting these different plants, and I thought it was also an interesting way how to think photography. So this is a light meter that measures photosynthesis in plants that are heavily polluted, and it can measure how much light is taken in by the plant and how much light is emitted by the plant. So I thought, again, you know, photography is a very wide and interesting field, so it doesn't have to be only the camera and the picture somehow, but could be also an internal exposure of a leaf over 100,000 years, which could be a photographic picture in a kind of conceptual way. So I made a little list of the elements that are part of those plants and the ground. So we have aluminium, then we have amino acid is part of the plant, but we have arsenum, cesium 137, we have copper, we have gadolinium, which is a rare earth element, germanium, we have lanthanum, which is used for light bulbs, here LSD light bulbs, magnesium, mercury, nickel, uranium, vanadium, and zinc. And the ground has similar properties, so I asked the biologist if I could somehow compare the property of the plant to the property of my mobile phone, and somehow there are some interesting similarities, not in quantity but in quality. So again, I thought like how to somehow use this. So I dried the plants and I made pigment from them, so just very similar to the process of the dusk dust. So these are the different pigments that I'm using, and I make two different works from it, which are kind of image-based at the moment still, but it's the process of working where I'm kind of trying to find ways. So there is an indexical print which shows the plants as they were, and a kind of caption that shows the different pigments that were kind of taken out from those plants and the ground. And also they make a record to all those elements that you were just reading. But I think, yeah, we moved on to different ways of how to actually make pictures with pigments that are made by myself. So you can't feed these pigments into inkjet printing, and I really didn't want to do silk screen because of the raster, so I really wanted to make a very photographical process, and in the end of the day we found a process from the 19th century which is called heliogravure. It's an etching that is transmitting film onto copper plate, and then the copper plate is kind of treated with pigment and line oil, and then you can print it, and the result is kind of very photographical. So to the left side you see the pure pigment print, but the pigment is a plant pigment, so this image will disappear over the turn of a year. Not so those elements inside of the pigment. So the cesium 30 years, the uranium a little bit longer, so there is like small little dots and pieces in the image that are still alive even if the image has had its life. And the right one is a kind of print that we enhanced with pollution dust, so like really black pollution dust from chimneys. And this will not disappear for quite some time, so it's a kind of reference image. But I made like, per image I made very different, like slowly but constantly, the process of adding more and more stable pigment to show this process of the lightening, and also to have this photo that is somehow alive in in a different way for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and so on. So I can show you those. This is the Bitterkraut. It's a plant that is really liking aluminium, zinc, uranium, nickel. This is the falsche Kamille, the false chamomile or Swedish chamomile. No way why they call them Swedish, but it's, I think, a plant that is also used for tea, so it's kind of close to our food chain. And that is the wild carrot. It's a carrot that grows on, also really likes to eat all those things. So I'm kind of 20 minutes from before. I have still quite some works to show, but maybe it's good time to start a dialogue, I think, before it becomes too complex, because it's already quite a lot of information, I think, that you had.
Yeah, first, thanks.